Welcome back to the Bureau of the Unexplained, where we dive into all things weird and unexplained. I want to start us off today with a story from 1973.
Right, the Poland incident.
Yeah, exactly. So a team of 12 healthy, totally robust scientists stepped into this stone vault in Poland, right? They were there to examine a 500-year-old coffin.
Just a standard archaeological examination.
Exactly. But within a matter of weeks, 10 of those 12 scientists were dead.
10 out of 12. It's just a staggering mortality rate.
It's insane. And today we're finding out why, and we're actually tying it back to a story that has completely haunted the public imagination for, over a century now.
Oh, absolutely. The granddaddy of them all.
We are heading straight into the heart of the Egyptian desert, you guys. We're going to explore the legendary Curse of the Pharaohs.
Specifically, the infamous tomb of King Tutankhamun.
Yes, King Tut. And the mission for this deep dive is to lay out these chilling, totally unexplainable events exactly as they were reported to a frankly terrified public back in the 1920s.
Because you really have to understand the terror to understand the story.
Right. So we're going to give you the sudden deaths, the eerie omens, the vengeful spirits, like all of it. Because to understand the truth of what happened, we first have to fully immerse ourselves in the myth.
And understanding the psychological landscape of the 1920s is absolutely vital here. I mean, if you were opening a newspaper in 1922, you were living in a world that was still heavily traumatized by the sheer industrial-scale slaughter of the First World War.
Oh, for sure. The grief was everywhere.
It really was. Millions of young men had just vanished in the trenches, right? And as a result, society experienced this massive resurgence in spiritualism.
Like seances and Ouija boards and all that.
Exactly. People were literally holding seances in their parlors, desperately trying to contact the dead.
Because they just wanted to talk to their sons or husbands one last time.
Precisely. So you combine that raw underlying grief with the sudden, explosive discovery of a pristine, ancient Egyptian tomb.
And the Egyptians were a culture completely obsessed with the afterlife.
Right. So you have this powder keg of superstition just waiting for a match. The curse wasn't some, fringe conspiracy theory for these people.
It was real to them.
It was a terrifying, tangible possibility playing out on the front page of the morning paper every single day.
Wow. Okay, let's set that scene. Let's put you, the listener, right in the thick of it. It is November 1922. We are in the Valley of the Kings, Egypt.
Which is not a comfortable place to be.
Not at all. It is relentlessly hot. The air is just choked with this fine, alkaline limestone dust that coats your throat. And British archaeologist Howard Carter is basically at the end of his rope.
He was completely exhausted, both physically and financially.
Yeah, because he has been digging in this desolate, sun-baked wadi for years, right? Moving literally hundreds of thousands of tons of rock and gravel by hand and finding basically nothing.
Nothing of substance, anyway. A few jars here and there.
Right. And his financier, the immensely wealthy George Herbert, who is better known as the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, is completely losing patience.
Carnarvon is just bleeding money at this point.
Years of paying a whole crew of workers for zero return. He actually explicitly told Carter that this is it. This is the final season of digging.
The faucet was getting shut off.
Exactly. The money is done. And then quite literally in the final hours before they are about to pack it all in and go home, a water boy is just messing around, clearing debris near the entrance of a totally different tomb, and he finds a step.
Just a single step carved into the rock.
Yeah, just a single stone step carved directly into the bedrock, totally hidden under centuries of rubble.
And the magnitude of finding even a single undisturbed step in that specific location, it really cannot be overstated.
Because the valley had been picked clean, right?
Completely picked clean. The Valley of the Kings was the royal necropolis for the New Kingdom pharaohs, and it had been ruthlessly, systematically looted in antiquity.
Like by ancient people.
Right. We are talking about grave robbers operating 3,000 years ago. Almost every royal tomb discovered before 1922, like Ramses the Great or Seti I, they had all been stripped bare of their treasures long before modern archaeologists ever arrived.
That has to be so depressing for an archaeologist.
It was the standard experience. You spend months breaking through a magnificent stone door only to find bare, echoed walls, a smashed sarcophagus, maybe some scattered shards of pottery.
Right.
So finding a staircase that led down to an untouched plastered doorway bearing the unbroken seals of the royal necropolis guards, well, it was the equivalent of finding a mythical city. It completely defied all statistical odds.
And the physical process of breaching that space, it reads like a movie. It's so cinematic. They dig down the staircase, clear the rubble, and find a sealed door.
Which is a huge moment in itself.
Totally.
Yeah.
They break through that only to find a descending passageway packed solid floor to roof with loose stone.
To deter robbers.
Right. And it takes them days to clear it, with the tension just building with every single bucket of rock they haul out. Finally, at the end of that passageway, they hit a second sealed door.
The final barrier.
Yeah. So Carter takes an iron rod and chips a tiny little hole in the upper left-hand corner. He lights a candle, basically to test for toxic gases, and pushes it through the hole.
And Lord Carnarvon is standing right there.
He's right behind him in the dark, practically vibrating with anticipation, right?
Yeah.
And he asks Carter, "Can you see anything?" And Carter utters literally the most famous words in archaeological history. He says, "Yes, wonderful things."
Which is just the perfect quote, because what Carter was looking at through that tiny fissure in the plaster was a literal, intact time capsule.
Oh man, what did he see?
Well, the flickering light of his candle was catching the glint of solid gold everywhere. They had breached the antechamber of a burial complex that had remained in total sealed darkness for over 3,000 years.
That is just wild to think about. 3,000 years.
It's hard to wrap your head around. And it was packed, floor to ceiling, with the material wealth of an entire empire.
Like what kind of stuff?
We're talking solid gold chariots that had been dismantled and stacked against the walls. Beautifully carved, life-size sentinel statues made of blackened wood and gold leaf, translucent alabaster vases, intricate furniture.
Just hoarder's paradise of priceless artifacts.
Exactly. And eventually, nested within multiple gilded shrines and solid gold coffins, they found the mummified remains of the boy king himself, adorned with that breathtaking 24-pound solid gold death mask.
24 pounds of solid gold on his face.
Yes, the sheer density of the wealth was completely unprecedented. It was a discovery that instantly shifted the axis of modern history.
But, and here's where it gets crazy, the triumph sours almost instantly. This is where the narrative shifts from an Indiana Jones adventure into basically a creeping horror film.
The mood shifts very quickly.
It really does. Because on the exact day that tomb was opened, the very first sinister omen strikes. So Carter had a pet canary, this bright little yellow bird that he kept in a gilded cage at his house near the dig site.
To bring a little life to the desert.
Yeah, exactly. And the story goes that a messenger was approaching Carter's house and heard this faint, desperate, almost human-sounding cry coming from inside.
That is so deeply unsettling.
Right. So the messenger rushes through the door, and there, inside the cage, the canary is dead. And wrapped around it, literally locked in its jaws, is a massive Egyptian cobra that had somehow slithered its way into the house.
Now, for the local Egyptian workers, this was a catastrophic event. It wasn't just a random predatory snake finding a bird.
There's a specific meaning to it.
A very specific meaning. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the rearing cobra is the uraeus. It is the ultimate divine symbol of the Egyptian monarchy.
Oh, like the snake you always see on the front of the pharaoh crowns.
Exactly. Whenever you look at a statue or a death mask of the pharaoh, you will see the uraeus perched right on the center of their forehead. And it was placed there specifically to spit fire, blind, and strike down the enemies of the king.
Which makes perfect sense if you understand the mythology. The uraeus isn't just an animal. I mean, it's a divine weapon. So, to the locals, this isn't an accident. It's a targeted strike.
It was interpreted as direct retaliation. The protector of the pharaoh had physically manifested in the modern world to punish the man who had ordered the ancient seals broken.
The pharaoh's hitman, basically.
You could say that, yeah. The ancient king's spirit was striking the home of the invader. The workforce was terrified, and rumors began to spread rapidly through the markets of Luxor and Cairo that a terrible line had been crossed.
Where they woke something up.
Precisely. The sanctuary of the dead had been violated, and the dead were going to answer.
That sets a deeply unsettling tone.
Yeah.
And it escalates so rapidly because soon after, reports start hitting the international wire services about a terrifying inscription found inside the tomb itself.
The physical curse.
Right, a literal carved-in stone curse. It supposedly read, "They who enter this sacred tomb shall swift be visited by wings of death." I mean, if you are a superstitious person reading that in the morning paper over your coffee, you are instantly primed for a bloodbath.
And that priming was actively encouraged by prominent cultural figures at the time.
Who was stoking the fire?
Well, Marie Corelli, for instance. She was a massively popular, best-selling novelist in Britain at the time. She wielded significant cultural influence.
Like the Stephen King or J.K. Rowling of her day.
That's a good comparison. She wrote widely publicized letters to newspapers in both New York and London, claiming to possess a rare ancient Arabic text that explicitly warned of dire supernatural punishment waiting for anyone who dared disturb a sealed Egyptian tomb.
I actually read her actual letters while researching this. She specifically warned that there were secret poisons enclosed in boxes waiting for rash intruders. She basically told millions of readers, watch these men, they are walking into a supernatural minefield.
She provided a vocabulary for the fear. The atmosphere was incredibly thick with anticipation. The public, heavily invested in spiritualism, was watching Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon with bated breath.
Wondering not just what gold they would find, but when the promised vengeance would fall.
Exactly. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And that vengeance falls hard and fast. Just 5 months after the tomb's opening, the event that truly ignites the global panic occurs.
The big one.
Yeah. Lord Carnarvon, the aristocrat who bankrolled the entire operation, the man whose name was plastered on every headline, he dies suddenly in his suite at the Continental Savoy Hotel in Cairo.
April 5th, 1923. That specific date marks the exact moment the local whisperings of a curse crystallized into an absolute international sensation.
If you're listening to this and trying to grasp the impact, think of it this way. Imagine if the primary billionaire financier of the Apollo moon landing dropped dead of a mysterious ailment just weeks after the astronauts safely returned to Earth.
The speculation would be out of control.
The whole world stopped and stared. You have the biggest, most triumphant, glittering news story of the decade, and suddenly the main character is dead. And the phenomena surrounding his final moments were incredibly eerie.
The reports filed from Cairo that night, they read like the climax of a Gothic novel.
Exactly. The story goes that at the exact moment Lord Carnarvon drew his last agonizing breath in his hotel bed, every single light in the city of Cairo mysteriously blacked out.
The entire grid.
The entire metropolis was plunged into total darkness. And as if that wasn't enough, back in England, at Carnarvon's sprawling Highclere Castle estate.
Which is thousands of miles away from the Egyptian desert, mind you.
Right, thousands of miles away. His beloved dog, Susie, suddenly stopped what she was doing. She let out this long, mournful howl, sat back on her haunches, and dropped dead. At the exact same time.
These synchronous events provided this powerful supernatural narrative for what might otherwise have been viewed as a tragic medical event.
Because a guy dying is sad, but the lights and the dog make it a curse.
Precisely. The blackout and the death of the dog served to completely validate the fears that Marie Corelli and others had been stoking. It was viewed as the physical manifestation of the wings of death.
And the press must have eaten that up.
Oh, naturally, they went completely wild with it, and the concept of the mummy's curse was forever cemented in the global consciousness.
They had a total field day. And Carnarvon was just the beginning. The curse seemed to act like a supernatural pathogen, just spreading out and striking down anyone remotely connected to the tomb.
It wasn't contained to just the dig site anymore.
Right. The body count started to rise.
Yeah.
And the sheer variety of their doom is what really builds the horror. It wasn't just one mysterious illness sweeping through a camp, it was a cascade of highly individualized tragedy.
The list of alleged victims grew rapidly, and the media meticulously documented every single one, linking their demise right back to the Boy King. The narrative logic of the curse was expanding.
I really want to walk through some of these because the details are chilling. First, you have George J. Gould. He is a wealthy American railroad executive.
Just a tourist, essentially.
Yeah, he travels to Egypt as a tourist, secures a visit to the tomb, walks inside the burial chamber, looks around at the gold, and almost immediately after stepping back out into the sun, he develops a severe shaking fever. He never recovers and dies of pneumonia just a few months later.
Then there was Aubrey Herbert, who was Lord Carnarvon's half-brother, and his death introduces a layer of profound, gruesome medical tragedy to the lore.
Oh my gosh, his story is horrific. It really does. Aubrey suffered from a degenerative eye condition and was rapidly going blind.
Right.
And in the 1920s, there was this popular, albeit totally misguided, medical theory called focal infection.
Basically the idea that a localized infection could cause systemic issues.
Right, usually in the teeth or tonsils, causing disease anywhere in the body, including the eyes. So a doctor somehow convinced Aubrey that his infected teeth were the root cause of his impending blindness.
Which is medically unsound.
Totally. So in a desperate, terrifying attempt to cure his sight, Aubrey has every single tooth surgically pulled from his head in one sitting.
And the procedure, predictably, did not restore his sight. What it did do, unfortunately, was introduce massive amounts of oral bacteria directly into his bloodstream.
Oh, man.
He developed severe sepsis, a systemic inflammatory response, and died in agony just 5 months after his brother, Lord Carnarvon.
Just a horrific way to die.
Yeah.
But because he was Carnarvon's brother, the newspapers instantly folded his death into the curse narrative. The rules of the curse changed.
It evolved.
Yeah, you didn't even have to enter the tomb or breathe the ancient air anymore. You just had to share the bloodline of the man who broke the seal.
The net was widening. It extended to the scientific team as well. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a prominent radiologist, was brought in specifically to X-ray Tutankhamun's mummified body before it was unwrapped.
And what happened to him?
He performs his duties, gets sick the very next day, and is dead within days of a mysterious illness before he can even publish his findings.
And the psychological toll this took on the remaining team members had to be immense. The atmosphere of fear was palpable, which leads us to Hugh Evelyn White.
Right, a highly respected British archaeologist.
He visited the tomb and actually helped with the excavation. By 1924, he has watched dozens of his colleagues, friends, and associates fall ill or die, and the paranoia completely consumes him.
He broke under the pressure.
He falls into a deep depression and ultimately hangs himself. But before he takes his own life, he allegedly writes a suicide note using his own blood, stating, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear."
That detail, the note written in blood, is a stark, terrifying reminder of how deeply this mythology had penetrated the minds of even rational, scientifically trained individuals.
A scientist writing in blood. It's wild.
The narrative had taken on a life of its own, completely overriding logic and reason.
And it wasn't just illness or psychological breaks either. There was outright inexplicable violence. Richard Bethel, who was Howard Carter's personal secretary.
A young man, right.
Yeah, a young man in the prime of his life and in perfect health. In 1929, he is found dead in his bed at an exclusive Mayfair club in London. The medical examiner could find no natural cause of death. The lingering suspicion. He was smothered to death as he slept.
When you aggregate all these events, the sudden illnesses, the bizarre accidents, the desperate surgeries, suicides, and suspected murders, it creates an incredibly compelling pattern for a public that was already eager to believe in the supernatural.
They were looking for a pattern, and they found one.
Exactly. And crucially, there were prominent, highly respected voices ready to provide a framework for that belief.
Right, and this is where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle enters the chat, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
Now, if you're listening to this, you might think the guy who invented the world's most logical, deduction-driven, hyper-rational detective would be the first person to step up and debunk this mass hysteria.
That is a very common and very understandable misconception. While Sherlock Holmes was the embodiment of empirical logic, Conan Doyle himself was moving in the exact opposite direction.
He was big into the occult.
He was a devout leading proponent of the spiritualist movement. He firmly believed in ghosts, seances, ectoplasm, and the ability of mediums to communicate with the dead.
Wow, really?
Oh, yes. He had lost family members in World War I, and like millions of others, sought comfort in the idea that the dead were still accessible.
So, when Lord Carnarvon dies, Conan Doyle doesn't suggest looking at the medical records or checking for local pathogens.
No, not at all.
He goes straight to the international press and publicly legitimizes the curse. He suggests that Tutankhamun's priests, who were supposedly highly skilled in the dark arts, had summoned what he called elementals.
Elementals?
Yeah, these are supernatural, demonic guardians bound by ancient magic to the physical space of the tomb, specifically designed to protect the burial chamber and aggressively punish intruders.
By using a term like elementals, Conan Doyle was blending ancient Egyptian religious practices with modern Edwardian occultism. He gave the public a quasi-theological, almost pseudo-scientific explanation for the string of deaths.
Because he was a doctor too, wasn't he?
He was. If the creator of Sherlock Holmes, a trained physician himself, looked at the evidence and concluded it was a supernatural assassination via elementals, who was the average newspaper reader to argue?
It's the ultimate celebrity endorsement for a curse. And while digging into this, I found something even crazier.
Yeah.
Because as the media is whipping themselves into a frenzy over King Tut and tracking every sneeze of anyone who went near the Valley of the Kings, they start looking for other cursed Egyptian artifacts to fill the column inches.
The public demanded more content.
Yeah. They realize that the Tutankhamun curse isn't an isolated incident. They dig up the story of an even older, seemingly far deadlier artifact that had been sitting right in London for decades.
You're referring to artifact EA22542 at the British Museum.
Colloquially known to the public as the Unlucky Mummy.
Yes.
This story is wild. It predates the King Tut discovery entirely. The origin story starts back in the 1860s. Four rich young Englishmen are traveling in Luxor, Egypt, basically doing the classic Victorian Grand Tour.
Right, buying up souvenirs.
Exactly. They buy this beautifully painted wooden mummy board, which is basically the intricately decorated inner lid of a coffin. It supposedly belonged to a high priestess of Amun-Ra.
The actual provenance of the object is murky at best, but the trail of destruction associated with it in popular lore is incredibly specific and relentlessly dramatic.
Absolutely relentless. Because shortly after they buy it, the curse activates. One of the Englishmen simply wanders out into the desert one night and is never seen again.
It's just vanished.
Vanished off the face of the earth. Another one accidentally shoots himself in the arm while hunting down the Nile. The wound turns gangrenous, and the arm has to be amputated.
And the remaining two, who managed to survive the trip and make it back to England with the artifact, don't fare much better at all.
Not at all. They return home, and within a remarkably short time, they both suffer massive, inexplicable financial ruin. They lose their entire fortunes, fall into severe, debilitating illness, and die in absolute poverty. One of them allegedly ends up selling matches on the street just to survive.
It reads perfectly like a Victorian morality play.
Right.
The wealthy, arrogant colonizers desecrating ancient artifacts for their own amusement and receiving their swift, terrible, karmic comeuppance.
So the artifact changes hands a few times, bringing catastrophic bad luck to everyone who touches it. We're talking mysterious house fires, severe carriage accidents, sudden illnesses, until a terrified owner practically begs the British Museum to take it off their hands.
Just get it out of my house.
Exactly. But putting it behind thick museum glass doesn't stop it. The night watchmen at the museum start reporting terrifying phenomena. In the dead of night, they claim they hear a woman crying from inside the glass case and the sound of frantic hammering, like someone trapped trying to break out of the wood.
The reports of paranormal activity at the museum were so persistent that prominent journalists of the time actually launched investigations.
Really? Like real journalists?
Yes. A journalist named Bertram Fletcher Robinson began looking into the malevolent powers of the mummy board in 1904. He published his findings, and he died 3 years later of typhoid fever at the tragically young age of 36. And once again, right on cue, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle chimed in, attributing Robinson's death directly to the Egyptian elementals guarding the priestess.
Elementals again. Conan Doyle had his theory, and he just stuck to it. But this brings us to the ultimate disaster associated with the unlucky mummy.
The big one.
The story goes that the British Museum finally gets so terrified of this artifact, so tired of the night watchman quitting and the journalists dying, that they decide to quietly get rid of it.
Ship it out.
They sell it to a wealthy American collector. In April 1912, they pack it into a heavy wooden crate and load it onto a ship bound for New York.
And we all know the name of the ship making its maiden voyage to New York in April 1912.
That ship was the RMS Titanic. The legend says the unlucky mummy was sitting in the cargo hold, and her ancient, vengeful curse is what actually sank the unsinkable ship.
It is the ultimate collision of two massive cultural mythologies. You have the hubris of modern industrial engineering embodied by the Titanic, and the ancient, inescapable vengeance of Egypt.
If you're listening to this and thinking, okay, wait a minute, are we seriously saying an ancient Egyptian priestess sank a 52,000-ton steel ocean liner with an iceberg? You're not alone. I had the exact same thought.
It sounds utterly ridiculous.
It sounds like the plot of a terrible B-movie. How did this story even gain an ounce of traction?
It sounds ridiculous to modern ears, but it was widely, fervently believed at the time. The origin of this specific myth can be traced back to a single man named William Stead.
Okay, who was he?
He was a prominent, highly respected journalist and, crucially, a very vocal spiritualist. He was also a first-class passenger on the Titanic.
Okay, so he's actually on the ship.
Yes. And Stead had moved in the same social circles as the previous owners of the unlucky mummy back in London. He was intimately familiar with its cursed reputation and all the ghost stories surrounding it, according to the accounts of several survivors of the Titanic. On the night before the ship struck the iceberg, Stead was sitting at a large table in the first-class dining room, holding court. and telling the other passengers the terrifying tale of the cursed mummy at the British Museum.
Wow. So he's literally sitting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean telling ghost stories about a cursed mummy just hours before the iceberg hits.
Precisely. Stead tragically died in the freezing waters during the sinking. But the survivors who had sat at his table, who had heard his story, they remembered it vividly.
Of course they would.
When they were rescued by the Carpathia and subsequently interviewed by the frantic press in New York, they recounted Stead's chilling tale of the cursed mummy. In the chaotic, highly emotional aftermath, as newspapers scrambled for sensational angles to sell millions of copies, the story mutated.
I gave him a telephone.
Exactly. Stead's dinner table ghost story transformed into a literal claim that the mummy itself was actually secretly on board the ship, actively causing the disaster.
That is a masterclass in how a rumor becomes a legend.
Hmm.
The timing is just too perfect.
It highlights a profound human psychological need to find meaning in senseless tragedy. The sinking of the Titanic was a massive, traumatic shock to the technological optimism of the Edwardian era.
Right, because it was supposed to be unsinkable.
Blaming an ancient curse provided a narrative framework, however fantastical, that made the incomprehensible somehow understandable. It wasn't just a failure of engineering or a captain ignoring ice warnings or a lack of lifeboats. It was the wrath of the gods. It placed the tragedy within a recognizable mythic structure.
We'd rather believe in angry ghosts than bad rivets.
Exactly.
Now, is any of this true?
This is the crucial pivot point. We have explored the mythology, the genuine fear, and the incredibly compelling narratives that captivated the world. But when we apply rigorous historical scrutiny, look at cargo manifests, and actually examine the medical data, the entire architecture of the curse begins to collapse entirely.
Let's start with the Titanic, because that is the most outrageous claim. Did the unlucky mummy sink the Titanic? I dug into the museum records, and the answer is so definitively boring.
Unequivocally, no. Let's break down the hard facts regarding artifact EA22542. First, as we established, it is not even a mummy. It is just a painted piece of wood. There's no body associated with it.
Okay, strike one.
Second, and most importantly, the British Museum keeps meticulous, obsessive records of its inventory. The unlucky mummy was acquired by the museum in 1889, and it never left the building until the year 1990, when it went on a temporary loan to an exhibition in Australia.
So it was sitting safely on a shelf in Bloomsbury, London, the entire time the Titanic was going down in the North Atlantic.
Exactly. Furthermore, in 1985, the Titanic Historical Society, which is a group of incredibly thorough researchers, analyzed the complete official cargo manifest of the Titanic. Every crate, every piece of luggage.
What did they find?
There were absolutely zero Egyptian artifacts of any kind listed on board. The entire story is a pure fabrication born entirely from William Stead's dinner conversation being warped by a sensationalist press.
Okay, so the Titanic myth is entirely busted. But what about King Tut? That feels a lot more grounded in real events. The people actually died. Where did the media fabrication of King Tut's curse come from? Because someone had to start the fire.
To understand the true origin of the Tutankhamun curse, we have to look away from ancient magic and focus squarely on modern capitalism.
Always comes back to money.
Specifically, media monopoly and journalistic greed. Excavating a tomb of that magnitude, clearing tons of rubble, preserving delicate artifacts, it was incredibly expensive. To recoup his massive financial investments, Lord Carnarvon made a highly controversial business decision. He sold the exclusive worldwide reporting rights for all news regarding the tomb to just one single newspaper, the Times of London.
Oh, wow. So if you were a reporter for the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or the Daily Mail, you were completely locked out of the biggest story of the century. You couldn't even approach the dig site.
Exactly. Carter and Carnarvon set up a strict perimeter. They wouldn't let rival journalists near the site, they wouldn't grant interviews, and they wouldn't share photographs.
That's rough.
These rival reporters were forced to sit in the sweltering heat of Luxor hotel lobbies, wait for the Times of London to publish an article, and then they would have to rewrite the Times article a day later for their own papers.
And if there is one thing journalists hate more than anything, it's being scooped on a massive story, let alone being legally barred from reporting it.
They were furious. And locked out of the actual facts of the excavation, rival journalists had to find another way to sell papers. A central figure in this was Arthur Weigel.
Okay, who was he?
He was a journalist for the Daily Mail, but he was also a former Egyptologist who had a bitter, long-standing professional rivalry with Howard Carter.
Oh, so he had a grudge.
A major grudge. Unable to report on the stunning artifacts, journalists like Weigel turned to sensationalism. They began to invent stories out of whole cloth, lean heavily into the local superstitions of the workforce, and systematically weave a narrative of a deadly curse.
So the mummy's curse was basically invented because reporters were mad they couldn't get press credentials.
Hmm.
That is incredible. What about that terrifying wings of death inscription? They who enter this sacred tomb shall swift be visited by wings of death. Where was that actually found?
It wasn't found anywhere. It never existed.
Wait, really?
A reporter entirely fabricated it to spice up a slow news day. There is no curse inscribed over the door, or on the walls of the antechamber, or on the sarcophagus. In fact, ancient Egyptians rarely put curses in tombs.
They didn't.
No, the texts they painted on tomb walls were spells from the Book of the Dead, designed to help the deceased navigate the dangers of the underworld, not to kill grave robbers. The idea of a booby-trapped, cursed tomb is largely a Hollywood invention and a product of Victorian Gothic fiction.
That is wild. The most famous quote of the whole saga is completely made up. Okay, let's playfully dismantle some of these other spooky omens that we talked about, because they sounded so convincing when we first laid them out. Let's start with Carter's canary being eaten by the royal cobra. That feels way too specific to be fake. I actually looked into that canary story, and it's completely fabricated.
It is a phenomenal story, beautifully symbolic, but the truth is wonderfully mundane. Carter did have a pet canary, and he did keep it at his house to brighten up the desolate environment.
But no cobra attack.
None. Before the heavy, chaotic excavation of the tomb actually began, he decided the dig site was no place for a delicate bird. So he gave the canary to a friend named Minnie Burton to look after. She, in turn, eventually gave it to a local bank manager in Luxor.
So the bird lived.
The canary lived a long, happy, and thoroughly uneaten life in the lobby of a bank. The fateful meeting with the Uraeus cobra never happened.
Okay, so the canary is fine. But what about the lights blacking out in Cairo at the exact moment of Lord Carnarvon's death? That's documented, right? People saw the lights go out.
It is fully documented that the lights went out in Cairo that night. However, what the sensationalist reports conveniently omitted was the actual mechanical state of the infrastructure in 1920s Egypt.
Ah, the grid.
Following the war, Cairo experienced a rapid population boom, and its power grid, relying on aging, overtaxed generators, was notoriously faulty. Widespread blackouts were incredibly common. They happened practically every other night. To point to a power outage in 1920s Cairo as evidence of the supernatural is absurd. It was a coincidence of timing, not a supernatural event.
A power outage in a city with a broken power grid. Considerably less impressive when you explain the mechanics. Okay, but what about Susie the dog? The dog howling and dying in England at the exact same moment Carnarvon died in Cairo. That's a telepathic cross-continental curse. How do you debunk that?
It sounds incredibly compelling until you apply basic geography and time zones.
Oh, right.
The storytellers, trying to maximize the dramatic impact, claimed the dog died at exactly the same time, often citing 2:00 a.m. or 4:00 a.m. in the retellings. But they completely forgot to account for the longitudinal difference between Egypt and England.
Oh, man. They forgot the time zones.
Lord Carnarvon died at roughly 1:55 a.m. in Cairo. England is 2 hours behind Egypt. If the dog died at 4 a.m. in England, Carnarvon had already been dead for over 4 hours.
So it wasn't simultaneous at all.
The exact synchronization is a myth added later to make the story more cinematic. Furthermore, the claim relies on Carnarvon's son supposedly being awake in the middle of the night, obsessively watching the dog. When you look at the primary sources, the entire anecdote is highly suspect, likely exaggerated by grieving family members and amplified by the press.
It's amazing how easily these stories fall apart when you just poke them a little bit with logic. But if you're listening to this, you're probably screaming, but what about the body count? We can't ignore that a lot of people associated with the tomb died in horrific ways. Aubrey Herbert pulling his teeth out, Hugh Evelyn White hanging himself. I mean, that feels like a massive statistical anomaly.
That is a very important point, and we have to address it directly, because when we rely on anecdotes and selective reporting, our perception of risk becomes totally skewed. To truly answer the question of whether the tomb was a death sentence, we have to stop looking at spooky stories and look at the hard data.
The numbers.
And thankfully, we have an excellent, incredibly rigorous study to guide us.
Yes, the sources detail a fascinating study from 2002 by an epidemiologist named Mark R. Nelson, published in the highly respected British Medical Journal. He decided to apply rigorous modern statistical analysis to the mummy's curse. And epidemiological studies are no joke. They track disease patterns across populations.
Nelson's methodology was brilliant in its simplicity and strictness. He ignored the journalists and the tourists. He went back to the original historical records, specifically Howard Carter's detailed daily excavation diaries.
To see who was actually there.
Right. He identified 44 Westerners who were physically present in Egypt during the critical phases of the tomb's opening between 1923 and 1926.
Right, and to figure out if the curse was real, he divided them into two distinct groups. First, the exposed group, the 25 people who actually went inside the tomb, breached the physical seals, breathed the ancient air, and stood in the direct presence of the mummy. Second, the unexposed group, the 19 people who were in Egypt, part of the wider social circle or the logistical expedition, but who never actually set foot into the inner chambers.
It is the perfect scientific control group. He then spent years tracking down the death certificates and historical records to determine the exact lifespans of every single individual in both groups. If the curse was a real phenomenon, be it supernatural elementals or ancient poison, you would logically expect the exposed group to have a significantly lower life expectancy than the control group.
And the results of this study are completely staggering. I love this part. The 25 people who were directly exposed to the curse lived to an average age of 70. The unexposed control group lived to an average age of 75.
Now, at first glance, someone might say, aha, 70 is lower than 75, the curse is real. But statistically speaking, Nelson found that this difference was completely insignificant.
How so?
He calculated a p-value of 0.87. For those who aren't statisticians, a p-value helps determine if a result is meaningful or just random noise. A p-value of 0.87 means there's an 87% probability that the 5-year difference in age is due to pure random chance. To prove a real effect, scientists generally look for a p-value of 0.05 or lower.
So it's nowhere close.
The data definitively showed there was no accelerated death rate for those who entered the tomb.
And we really need to put those ages in historical context, too. In the 1920s, living to the age of 70 was a very good long life. They were actually beating the actuarial tables for that era. Statistically, the curse was apparently beneficial for your health.
Furthermore, Nelson looked for what epidemiologists call a dose-response effect. In toxicology, the more you are exposed to a poison, the worse your outcome should be. Did people who entered the tomb multiple times, who spent hours inside, die younger than those who only popped their head in once?
And did they?
The data showed absolutely no correlation. In fact, some of the people who had the most intimate, prolonged contact with the tomb and the mummy lived the longest.
Howard Carter himself is the perfect example of this. The man who discovered the tomb, who physically broke the seal with the iron rod, and who spent an entire decade painstakingly clearing it out piece by piece, breathing that dust every single day. He didn't die until 1939. He lived another 17 years after opening the tomb, eventually passing away from Hodgkin's lymphoma at age 64. If anyone was going to get annihilated by the wings of death, it should have been him.
And consider Sergeant Richard Adamson. He was the sturdy military policeman assigned to physically guard the tomb. He literally set up a cot and slept inside the burial chamber for 7 years to protect the gold from looters.
Slept in there.
He breathed that air more than anyone. He lived a long, healthy life and didn't die until 1982.
Or Lady Evelyn Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's daughter. She was one of the very first people to step inside the tomb alongside Carter and her father. She lived a full life, reaching 79 years old and dying in 1980. The people closest to the epicenter of the supposed curse thrived.
What happened here is a classic case of survivorship bias driven by the media. Think of it like focusing only on the people who win the lottery and completely ignoring the millions of losing tickets blowing in the wind.
That makes total sense.
Whenever someone remotely connected to the expedition died, even years later, regardless of the actual medical cause, it made front-page international news as a victim of the curse. But when someone like Carter or Adamson lived a long, perfectly healthy life, it wasn't reported because Archaeologists Has Normal Tuesday doesn't sell newspapers.
Exactly. The statistics completely debunk the idea of a supernatural death sentence. The math just doesn't support the myth. But I have to ask the lingering question. If the curse is totally fabricated, what actually killed Lord Carnarvon so quickly? He was dead just 5 months after opening that door. Even without a curse, that's a heck of a coincidence to kick off this whole panic.
It is a tragedy, but a very mundane, medically explainable one when you examine his medical history. Lord Carnarvon was not a robust, healthy explorer. The primary reason he was spending his winters in the dry climate of Egypt in the first place was because his health had been severely compromised years prior.
Right. He was involved in a horrific, near-fatal car crash in Germany back in 1901. He was an early automobile enthusiast and rolled his car.
Yes, the accident crushed his chest, damaged his lungs, and left him extremely frail, suffering from chronic asthma and highly prone to severe respiratory infections. He was a man whose immune system was constantly struggling just to maintain a baseline.
So the famous story about the mosquito bite, was that real?
The mosquito bite was real. He was bitten on the cheek by a mosquito in Cairo. A few days later, while shaving with a straight razor, his hand slipped, and he accidentally nicked the raised bite, slicing it open.
Just a tiny cut.
But in the hot, dusty, unsanitary environment of early 20th century Egypt, that open facial wound quickly became infected with a virulent streptococcal bacteria, leading to a condition known as facial erysipelas.
Which is severe blood poisoning.
Exactly. The bacteria entered his bloodstream, and we must remember this is 1923. Modern antibiotics like penicillin hadn't been discovered yet. The infection spread rapidly unchecked. It overwhelmed his already deeply compromised immune system, traveling to his damaged lungs, leading to severe pneumonia and ultimately multi-organ failure. It was a tragic, agonizing medical event, but it is entirely consistent with his fragile health and the limited medical capabilities of the era. It had absolutely nothing to do with ancient elementals or magical poisons.
It's sad, really. A guy survives a terrible car crash, spends a fortune funding the greatest archaeological discovery of the century, and gets taken out by a shaving nick and a mosquito.
It demonstrates the sheer fragility of human life before the advent of antibiotics, a stark historical reality that gets entirely lost in the romantic mythology of the curse.
So the supernatural curse collapses under the weight of basic math and geography. The math shows everyone lived normal lives, and the omens were either fabricated or misunderstood. But here is the paradox. While the magic was a fabrication, stepping into that tomb actually was genuinely, physically lethal.
Yes, highly dangerous.
Just not for the reasons Conan Doyle thought. We need to talk about the real physical curse, the biological hazards.
This is where the story pivots from folklore to fascinating, terrifying microbiology. When you seal a chamber deep underground for 3 millennia, you aren't just preserving gold masks and mummified bodies, you are inadvertently creating an isolated, highly specialized, stagnant ecosystem.
Think about the mechanics of what the Egyptians put in those tombs. They didn't just bury a body, they buried everything the king would need to sustain himself in the afterlife. Elaborate feasts of breads, roasted meats, baskets of fruits, jugs of wine, floral garlands, wooden furniture.
All of which is organic matter. Over thousands of years, that organic matter inevitably breaks down. As it decays in a completely sealed, dark, and often slightly humid environment, it becomes the perfect, undisturbed breeding ground for microscopic horrors.
Microscopic horrors, I love that.
It's true. Fungal spores enter a state of cryptobiosis, essentially shutting down their metabolism entirely, waiting patiently for centuries for a breath of fresh air or a host to colonize.
We're talking about incredibly toxic molds and fungi. The sources specifically mention species like Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus.
Aspergillus is a very common fungus. You likely have some in your house right now. But in the massive, concentrated doses found in a sealed tomb, it can be devastating. Aspergillus flavus, in particular, produces highly toxic compounds called aflatoxins.
And what happens when you breathe that in?
When a human inhales a massive dose of these dormant spores, they awaken in the warm, moist environment of the lungs. They can cause invasive aspergillosis, a severe respiratory infection where the fungus literally colonizes the pulmonary alveoli, forming fungal masses that destroy lung tissue. It can easily spread to the heart or brain and is often fatal, particularly in individuals whose immune systems are already compromised, like Lord Carnarvon.
And it's not just mold. There are dormant bacteria like Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas surviving on the mummified skin and ancient textiles. And if even a single bat has managed to find a tiny fissure into the outer chambers over the centuries, you have to deal with histoplasmosis from the ancient bat guano.
Which causes a severe flu-like respiratory disease that mimics tuberculosis.
Right. Furthermore, the chemical decomposition process of all that organic matter releases noxious, deadly gases. Modern air samples taken from unopened sarcophagi have revealed highly dangerous concentrations of ammonia gas and hydrogen sulfide.
Hydrogen sulfide is incredibly toxic. It smells like rotten eggs, and in high concentrations, it attacks the nervous system. It can cause you to pass out and die almost instantly before you even realize you're suffocating.
So when an archaeologist like Howard Carter physically breaches a tomb, swings a hammer through the plaster, They are potentially stepping into a concentrated, invisible cloud of dormant spores, aggressive bacteria, and toxic gases that haven't seen fresh air in 30 centuries.
To prove just how deadly this physical curse can be, we have to look back at the terrifying true story I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, the tomb in Poland in 1973.
Right, the hook.
This was the tomb of King Casimir I Jagiellon. He died in 1492, so not nearly as old as Tutankhamun, but still sealed tight for nearly 500 years.
The Casimir effect, as it's sometimes referred to in epidemiological circles, is the ultimate grim cautionary tale for modern archaeologists. It proves that the biological threat is very real.
In 1973, a team of 12 highly trained scientists got permission to open his wooden coffin in Krakow to study his remains. It was a major academic event. But within just a few weeks of opening that coffin, 10 of those 12 scientists were dead. 10 out of 12.
It was a horrific, shocking loss of life. And naturally, given the history we've just discussed, initial rumors immediately circulated of a Jagiellonian curse. The public rushed to the supernatural.
As they always do.
But when medical investigators looked closely at the tomb environment and performed autopsies on the scientists, they found the real biological culprit.
It was the fungus.
Yes. The interior of the wooden coffin was heavily, densely infested with 13 different types of fungi, but predominantly Aspergillus fleetus. When the scientists pried open the heavy lid, the sudden shift in air pressure sent a massive invisible cloud of dormant spores straight into their faces.
Unknowingly inhaling lethal doses.
Right. They inhaled lethal doses of the fungus, which aggressively attacked their lungs, causing rapid, fatal respiratory failure.
That is genuinely terrifying. It really makes you wonder if Howard Carter and his team just got incredibly, astronomically lucky, or if the bone-dry desert air of Egypt prevented the mold from growing as densely as it did in the damper climate of Poland.
It was almost certainly a combination of the incredibly dry Egyptian climate inhibiting massive fungal growth and perhaps sheer luck regarding their individual immune systems. But the Casimir incident in Poland fundamentally and permanently changed how the scientific community approaches ancient excavations.
Right, because modern archaeologists don't just put on a fedora, light a torch, and smash through a stone wall with a pickaxe anymore. They treat these tombs exactly like what they are: active, deadly biohazard zones.
The protocols today are incredibly rigorous. Before they even consider breaching a wall, they use ground-penetrating radar to map the voids behind the stone. When they do find a sealed chamber or a sarcophagus, they absolutely do not pry off the lid immediately.
They drill a microscopic hole.
Yeah, they drill a microscopic hole and insert a long probe to take atmospheric samples, testing the air for hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and combustible gases.
And when the air is cleared and they finally do go in, they look like they're walking into a nuclear reactor meltdown. They wear full-body, sealed Tyvek suits, heavy-duty gloves, and most importantly, P100 particulate respirators to filter out those ancient mold spores and toxic bone dust.
Sometimes, if the bioload is high, they even set up negative pressure tents with industrial ventilation fans to cycle out the bad air for days before anyone is allowed to breathe it.
It is a striking, almost comical contrast to the archival images of Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon standing in the cramped, dusty tomb in their three-piece wool suits and bow ties, sweating and breathing deeply.
No masks, no gloves, just breathing it in.
The early explorers were walking blind into highly toxic environments with zero biological protection. It is frankly a medical miracle. More of them didn't fall ill to the very real biological hazards.
It really is. So the curse isn't supernatural magic spun by elementals, it's microscopic biology waiting patiently in the dark. But we have one final, incredible pivot for you today, because this story has the ultimate plot twist.
It is a profound, beautiful example of how deepening our scientific understanding can completely transform our relationship with the natural world.
We just spent a lot of time talking about how deadly Aspergillus flavus is. Yeah. The fungus that killed the Polish scientists, the fungus that might have infected early explorers and contributed to the rumors of the Pharaoh's curse. It is a microscopic, indiscriminate killer. But a recent groundbreaking development from bioengineers at the University of Pennsylvania is completely flipping the script on this organism.
The researchers at Penn decided to stop looking at this fungus purely as a threat and started taking a much closer look at its unique, highly aggressive biological properties.
They aren't trying to figure out how to destroy it, they are trying to harvest it. I read the breakdown on this, and the mechanics of what they are doing are mind-blowing.
The researchers are extracting a highly specific class of compounds from the Aspergillus flavus fungus. These compounds are called RIPPs.
Spelled RIPPS, right?
Correct. It stands for ribosomally synthesized and post-translationally modified peptides.
Okay, let's translate that for the listener because that is a mouthful. What exactly does that mean?
Think of a ribosome like a microscopic 3D printer inside a cell. Its job is to read genetic instructions and print out basic proteins or peptides. Now, a standard peptide might not do much on its own, but post-translationally modified means that after the ribosome prints this basic peptide, the cell enzymes act like mechanics.
Like tuning up a car.
Exactly. They grab that basic peptide and aggressively modify it, folding it, adding chemical armor, changing its structure to make it incredibly potent and stable. It's like taking a basic car chassis straight off the assembly line and modifying it into a heavily armored tank. These RPPs are the chemical weapons the fungus uses to attack and survive.
And what are these researchers using these weaponized fungal RIPPs for?
They are re-engineering them to create a highly promising new anti-cancer compound. They realized that the very mechanisms that make the fungus so toxic, its ability to aggressively attack and break down human cells, could be targeted. By modifying the RAPPs, they are essentially programming these microscopic fungal weapons to seek out and destroy cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue alone.
The ultimate irony. The microscopic curse that was left behind to punish grave robbers. The deadly mold that terrified society in the 1920s and actually killed scientists in the 70s might eventually be refined in a lab to save millions of lives in modern hospitals. The ancient poison is literally becoming the modern cure.
It beautifully illustrates the deep duality of nature. A biological pathogen in one context, inhaled in a dusty tomb, can become a targeted, life-saving therapy in another, provided we approach it with rigorous scientific curiosity rather than blind superstition.
That is just incredible. It takes the whole story full circle, from ancient kings burying their gold, to greedy journalists inventing ghosts to sell papers, to dormant deadly mold, and finally to cutting-edge cancer research. What an absolute ride. Well, that brings us to the end of our journey into the Valley of the Kings. Thank you so much to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive into the curse of the Pharaohs. We hope you enjoyed separating the sensational fiction from the deeply fascinating biological facts as much as we did. If you have any weird or unexplained topics you want us to cover next, make sure to tell us in the comments section. We read all of them, and we love seeing what mysteries you guys are curious about. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a deep dive from the Bureau of the Unexplained.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thing to ponder. We've spent this time meticulously dismantling the supernatural curse with shipping manifests, geographical timelines, and rigorous epidemiological analysis. We know the magic isn't real, yet, a full century later, the legend of the mummy's curse is as popular as ever. It still inspires blockbuster movies, best-selling books, and endless speculation. Why do we want to believe in the mummy's curse? Even when science hands us the mundane answers, the legend survives. Perhaps deep down, the curse is just a manifestation of our own cultural guilt, a psychological defense mechanism. We know, fundamentally, that desecrating the graves of the dead, stripping their bodies and putting their sacred belongings in glass cases for our own curiosity and enrichment is a profound transgression. The curse is the consequence we invent for ourselves. It is a supernatural punishment for our very real intrusion into the sacred spaces of the past. Think about that the next time you see a mummy in a museum.